Our awesome, okay, perfect, good.
You're live.
Awesome. So welcome to Must See Dentisting TV with Dentist Job Connect. Do brokers help or hurt when buying a dental practice? How to prepare to buy a dental practice? What you should know to not get taken advantage of by a broker. And I happen to have a broker here with me, my friend, president of United Dental Brokers of America, someone who I've learned so much about, Bob Septak. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Paul, how you doing? Thanks for having us on. I appreciate it.
And we are going to talk about you. Now, I always say dentists are weird, Bob, but you signed up to work with us dentists, so maybe you're the weirdest one of all. You ever think of that?
Could be. I mean, there's weird ones in all walks of life, and I'm an accountant by trade, so I guess there's weird accountants as well.
You're going to retire and start counting nachos. I'll give you the brand for that, so you can
Absolutely,
do that. So we're going to deliver some real value to our audience. We have a list of questions to how to work with a broker, how to prepare to buy a practice, how not to get taken advantage of, but just orient our audience as to who you are. Tell us a little bit about UDBA, when did you start it, and what you do in your daily brokering life.
Well, UDBA was started about 18 years ago. And what happened was I was owner of a CPA firm with a partner. And we had a client that was a dentist that wanted to sell his practice. And my partner sent him down to me and said, hey, Bob, I'll help you sell that practice. And of course, we had never sold a practice, but we did. And in the process of selling this practice, we sent out some letters, and we had about 15 to 20 other folks say, hey, we're looking to buy a practice. And I'm thinking, well, geez, we've only got one to sell. We need more people to sell. And then we sent out a letter saying, hey, we need some more sellers. And it just kind of snowballed from there.
Awesome. And I'm proud to be, a broker in the Philadelphia area, New Jersey. We added dentisting brokers here. We have the awesome Laura's helping you. I have a question though, Bob. Maybe think of this. When we're young dentists and we have Bob Septak in our chair as a patient, sometimes you go, is this the first crown you've ever done, right? So when you were selling that first practice, did they even ask that, or did they not even ask that if it was your first one?
I guess fortunately, the client was a client of the CPA firm. So
gotcha.
He trusted the CPA firm. So in essence, since I was one of the owners, he's trusting that I can sell that dental practice. And really, I wouldn't have taken it on if I didn't think I could sell it. It just took a whole lot of me time, right, in learning how to go about it, as opposed to today, we have about 15 states covered. And if a broker wants to plug in, they're plugging in 18 years of experience, which I didn't have when I started.
Yeah, and you do a great job coaching our brokers. UDBA, the best website is udba.biz to find out our current listings. Go to UDBA. So we're going to go over questions to help people make the biggest decision of their life with Bob Septak, Dentist Job Connect team. Let's note these questions, and then we'll kind of break down some of Bob's answer in a blog or email later, but this is for our video now. So, Bob, when should a dentist start the process of buying a dental practice, and how long does the process usually take?
Yeah, and it's certainly different for a seller versus a buyer. So let's just say that a buyer wants to buy a practice and he or she's not real particular, just pretty much wants a 5-op practice that's, say, collecting, I don't know, 500,000 or more. And it doesn't matter where it's at in the city, right? I mean, if that was the case, they could probably find something for sure within a year's time.
Well, Bob, I'm going to interject and interrupt. The chances of finding a dentist who's not particular, better chance of finding a unicorn. Okay. So most of the time.
Well, but we have to start there because there's always one somewhere that's like that, that's just not particular. So I at least have to
love your positivity, but now
I have to have that baseline in there. So that's the baseline, right? So now let's go to somebody, this is a little bit more realistic, that we have somebody that says, and this is more the majority of buyers, where they say, hey, I'm looking for a practice in the South Hills of Pittsburgh. I'm looking for about 5 ops or more. I'm looking for it to collect $750,000 or so. How long will that take? Well, that might take a while because there's lots of folks that are looking to be in the South Hills of Pittsburgh with that size of practice, right? So that that might not be something you're going to find in a year's time because there's other people looking for the same thing. And then what are the chances that you're the winning bid on that particular practice or those particular practices, right?
I would share, Bob. It sounds like a take home is definitely start earlier than you think. If you guys would like some resources from us.
I mean, something like that, you could be 3-4 years before you find the one and you're the successful bidder on that.
So that is such a key point. I'm going to say take home point is start earlier than you think. 2 to 3 years, especially if it's an area with high demand. If you text the word buy to 215-543-6454, we'll text you back courses to help you, checklist for success. So I like that, Bob. Start earlier than you think. It could be a 3 to 4 year process in a popular area, you would say.
Yeah, right. And so the third scenario is somebody says, the buyer says, I'm looking to buy a practice $1 million or more with 6 ops or more, and in a certain location. Well, now the problem is you're battling with some DSOs out there, and not just a couple.
Now let's talk about that for a minute. So now when you get to a practice, DSOs, they're not evil like Skeletor from my favorite show, He-Man. They're not heroes like Robin Hood. They are players in the industry looking to buy practices and grow what they're doing. Love them, hate them, annoyed by them, think they're indifferent. They're players in the practice purchase process. So what you're sharing, Bob, is DSOs most of the time like practices that have 5 or more ops and collect over $1 million. Is that accurate?
Right. And they want the dentist to stay on a couple of years, maybe 3 to 5 years. But
now, if you're looking to buy that practice as a private practice buyer and you are competing against a DSO, where do the DSOs have advantages in your mind?
Well, they've got their own financing. They've got in-house financing. So
giant pile of Scrooge McDuck coins. It's a very
exactly.
So they have their own financing.
They're not going to the bank asking for financing just like the regular buyer is. And I mean, I don't want to say that they are, quote, overpaying, but they're typically paying more than an individual buyer would and or can get financing for. So that's where they have the advantage.
Bob, because we're going to get to another take-home point is, one, DSOs can pay more than what banks will offer private buyers. Connect with banks early so you develop relationships with banks. So we talked about an advantage DSOs have. They do not need bank financing and they can pay more. But if you're a private practice dentist watching this and you want to buy this practice, what's your advantage of a private practice dentist? You said it before about how long the seller has to stay. What's your advantage as the private practice dentist?
Yeah, I mean, that's the advantage that you have if that seller is one that says, I really don't want to hang on much longer. I've done this for 30, 40 years. I'm pretty much ready to be done. And if that's the case, okay, now you've got the advantage because most DSOs aren't going to buy a practice where the seller is just walking out the door. So that's where, the individual buyer now has the advantage. Now, the seller's not going to get as much money, but, on his side is, hey, I'm ready to retire. I want to go travel.
They're ready to hang up the handpiece. Hey, Nacho team, I need to get a handpiece from my office that's broken because here's what I want to say, Bob. I want to say 2 things. One, as dentists, sometimes people come to us and say, I don't like the way my front tooth looks. I want it fixed for my daughter's wedding. I go, okay, cool. When's your daughter's wedding? They go, next week. I go, could you have come earlier and told me about this? Us dentists deal with this, and we deal with this as brokers. So one of the things I want to layer in value here is one of the first questions I ask as a practice broker is I say, hey, Dr. Bob Septak, when do you want to hang up the handpiece? When do you want to finish doing dentistry as an owner and associate? And if they say 6 months and they haven't started to sell their practice, they are way behind schedule. So as a buyer, look to find at C courses, say, when would you think about retiring? And if a dentist says in the next year, a DSO is not going to buy that practice. So that's a really good point there, Bob. Let's go to next question. In your experience, in a broad picture way, not necessarily UDBA brokers, how do good dental practice owners help buyers find the right practice? Positivity help. Well, you've been around brokers for a long time. We're going to talk about how they hurt, but let's talk about how does a good broker help? When a buyer says, why should I work with a broker? Why should I get connected with you guys in our practice? How do they help?
Yeah. Well, so one thing to keep in mind is there's no fee for the buyer to work with a broker or multiple brokers, right? He can work with UDBA and other brokers all at the same time, right? So and there's no fee for them to do that.
Now, I like that most of the time. I'd like to interrupt this show for a spicy comment. There's a certain type of broker that only works in our industry that charges the buyer. What are they called, Bob?
Yeah, well, there's some that they think they can work on both sides of the fence.
Dual rep brokers.
Yeah.
So Bob, if you met somebody, if you left this webinar and you went to the local pizza place and someone said, "Hi, my favorite football team is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I also love the Philadelphia Eagles," would you think that's a normal person?
No, probably not.
That's a Rob Montgomery joke. So a dual rep broker, beware of dual rep brokers. They claim they can represent both sides. I have lost over $30,000 as a buyer working with a dual rep broker. I did it 10 years ago. I didn't know the difference. I was working with one of the more benign of the dual rep brokers back then. I'm not going to mention who, but beware of dual rep brokers. But back to your thing, Bob, most seller broker only brokers, not most, seller only brokers do not charge the buyer anything. So that's one help.
Yeah. And on the point of the dual rep thing, I mean, if you think about it, so as a broker, I'm just as honest with the buyer as I am with the seller. I'm going to educate them the best I can. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to do all these things. But the difference is if my client is, say, the seller, right? I'm here to make the best deal I can for that seller, right? Or if you're my client and you're the buyer, I'm here to make the best deal for you, the buyer, get the best deal for you. But I can't do both. Right. So I obviously can't get you the best deal and get you the best deal. Right. I need to do one or the other. So that's kind of where the problem arises.
I think, Bob, what's to point out, this can be done in an ethical way, because what I say to buyers is, if I was selling your practice if you buy this practice and then I'm still doing this 20 years from now and I'm selling it for you, do you want me to get you the best deal? They go, yeah. I said, well, here's the challenge. That's why you need your own team, your own attorney, your own accountant, and make the best offer possible. If you would like to connect with an attorney team, that's awesome. Text attorney to 215-543-6454. My team will share that in the chat, but also text attorney to that number, 215-543-6454. So the job of the broker is to get the best deal possible for his client, also still being honest with the buyer, but our job is to get them the best deal, just like getting the best price on a house.
Yeah. So continuing on with your question is so there's no fee. You can talk to multiple brokers at the same time. One other thing that we're doing that is saving the buyer steps is that we're analyzing that particular listing of ours and putting together a prospectus. So we're handing the buyer, in a nutshell, hey, here's a lot of what you want to know about this practice, how the practice operates, employees, the days they're open, insurance plans they participate with. Here's their tax return comparison. Here's a cash flow analysis. All of that, and it's handed to you, and you don't have to pay for it, right? So imagine if they had to do that on their own and go pay for an accountant or somebody to analyze that, right? So that's another big benefit that they're getting, that they don't have to pay for.
I love that, Bob. And I'll just kind of highlight that as brokers, potential sellers tell us they want to sell their practice even before listing. They'll say, I'll know a dental practice owner in this area who might sell in the next 3 to 4 years. So if you're a new dentist as an associate, developing relationship with brokers are so key, because they have relationships with people selling. I mean, Bob, people come to you and say, I don't want to list right now, but I want to list later. And there'll be a buyer that you can't tell them. You have to can maintain confidentiality. But when they develop a relationship with Bob Septak or Paul Goodman or Brandon Hill or Max or Lydia or all of our broker team people, we can look out for them to make that match later.
Yeah. And another thing that we help out with is so we talk to a buyer for first time, and I like to tell this story. I ask them, what size of practice are you looking for? And they'll always go to, I want a 4-up practice, or and that's kind of not what I'm asking. I'm asking, in essence, you need to make a certain amount of money to make a living. Okay. So I'm not worried about how many ops. I'm worried about, how much cash flow do you need in that practice to pay the bank, and enough to cover both of those. So quite often the buyer hasn't figured that out yet, right?
And also,
I'm
one of
more
the
than
things,
happy
Bob,
to help them
such a
analyze
good point.
that.
Back in the olden days of 2002, when I graduated from dental school, every single one of my friends, when they bought a dental practice, made more money versus when they were an associate. They were making 120, 150. They buy a practice, they make 200. Oh, that's good, right? But now you have associates earning sometimes $300,000 a year for a DSO, and they have to realize, if I buy a practice, even collecting $800,000, after paying my bank note, I'll make less. And have you found that to be something you have to have a discussion with buyers about?
Absolutely. I'll have people that they're looking at, tell me about that $450,000 practice. And hey, it's a client and I'm more than happy to show it to you, but how much do you need to make a year? Because if you're telling me you need to make like $170,000, unless you're growing that practice pretty rapidly, you're not going to make $170,000.
Yeah. Okay, I want to interrupt and say, you guys interject and say you can ask questions in the Q&A. We'd be glad to answer them. You can ask them anonymously. Let's go to this one, Bob. What is the deal with money? People really like money, I've noticed in life. How are banks financing practices right now? What are you seeing? $1 million practice, Pennington, New Jersey, where I work, 60-year-old seller, making $380,000 a year. What are banks doing right now, just in Bob's broad brushstrokes for bank financing?
Yeah, well, there are still many, many banks out there that will lend the buyer 100% financing to buy that practice. So you as the buyer are not going to take anything out of your pocket to buy that practice. Now, if you want to buy the building and the building's available for sale, you're probably going to have to put some money down to do that, maybe 10 to 20% of the price of the building. But if you're just buying a practice and you're going to rent, you're not going to have to take any money out of your pocket, assuming that you're paying a amount of money that the bank is willing to lend you. So the only exception would be, okay, I want to buy that $1 million practice that the DSO is bidding on, and they're willing to pay $1.2 million for that. Hey, bank, will you lend me $1.2 million on that $1 million practice? Well, maybe you're not going to get that.
That becomes impossible, like me dunking on a 10-foot rim. I can dunk on an 8-foot rim, maybe not even that, but I can't reach out. I do want to share that one of the things you should think of, dentists, which is very positive, even though you're in debt, people want to give you money. It's kind of crazy, right? You can have $600,000 in debt and someone wants to give you $1 million, but ABC always be connecting. We have a whole team at both UDBA and Nachos. If you text NTT to that same number, 215-543-6454, you can also email transitions@dentalnachos.com. We will connect you with accountants, banks, attorneys, consultants, insurance consultants. Yes, some of these are sponsored what I do. But Bob, just talk a minute you've been doing this for a long time. What's the value to buyers of having the right advisors, the right connections, the right people that will answer their phone outside of the broker?
Yeah, I mean, this is something most dentists are doing once in their life, right? Is buying a practice. So you don't want to penny pinch, right, on this side of it. I mean, spend the money to get a good dental focused attorney. Spend the money to have a accountant that deals with dental practices on a regular basis. So you need to spend the money at this point in your life. And well, hey, you're a perfect example, right? You said you had that little hiccup when you bought. Maybe had you had some other advisors, you might have.
Yeah, I didn't even know. I thought it was normal. It was the olden days of 2011, Bob. I didn't know the broker said, this is normal to be a dual rep. We had some general attorney, it wasn't bad. So one of the things too is, I describe brokers, Bob, as like the general dentist, the one you go and see for your cleanings, your crowns, but you need referrals to an endodontist sometime, like an accountant. Don't ask your broker. If your broker tells you that they can do the contract, it's a red flag. If your broker tells you, Bob, you have a specific experience with accounting, so I know, but if Paul Goodman says, I could figure out your exact add backs, don't hire an accountant, red flag, because you want to deal with the specialists in this field doing this every day.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen over 18 years a lot of contracts, right? But I would never tell somebody, hey, I
Right.
can handle this legal process for you. I mean, I'm certainly going to give you my 2 cents when I see some things, maybe an allocation, covenant not to compete, some things that I've seen over the years, but you don't rely on me as your legal representation.
And I'll give a good story for dentists watching. You refer someone to an endodontics, you say, hey, this tooth might be calcified. This is fancy dental language, Bob. You can zone out. But this root, the nerve might be calcified. The endodontist is going to tell us what they think, and it's not calcified at all. You were just totally wrong, right? Your guess was wrong. You might say, you're going to get this wisdom tooth out. It's sitting right on the nerve. It could be very risky. Your oral surgeon says it's not such a big deal. It can go the other way. So you're the general dentist as the broker, but get people who are doing that part every day. The attorneys are not brokering. The accountants are not being attorneys. So that's a good point. Bob, as we kind of wrap up here in the last 10 minutes, let's start with this. Share a story of stress or a real challenge. We did the $1 million practice that made no money. If people would like the $1 million practice that made no money, reach out to us, transitions@dentalnachos.com. What's a stress story or a real challenge you've seen in this brokering world? Could be on the seller side or the buyer side that people should be aware of.
Well, I can just tell you like a story that comes to mind where this is maybe 8 to 10 years ago. We had a buyer that was buying his second location, was pretty excited about it. Was thinking about buying multiple locations and running them, and had a deal in place. We had the attorneys draw up the agreements. The bank financing was in place. Everything was ready to go, except the night before, the buyer called me on the phone and said, hey, Bob, I hate to call you on this, but I've been talking to my wife and she's thinking that I'm crazy. I have young kids that I want to spend time with. I already have a practice that stretches me to the limit. And she's kind of talked me out of this, and I'm not going to buy that practice tomorrow.
Bob, that was like the Seattle Seahawks when they were about to win the Super Bowl. Everyone's like, they're going to win the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
99 yards the other way.
So the night before, everything was set to go. He said, I'm not going to go through with this. Jeez. So it could just be, just a conversation with your wife.
And that's why, Bob, you always taught me one buyer is no buyer, right? And that's why brokers need to have backup buyers, because that happens more often than people think for things in your control, out of your control. Such a good point.
One more example. This wasn't my deal, but I learned of a practice that was set to sell up the street for me. And the seller wouldn't let the buyer go in and talk to the employees until the day of closing, right? Till the morning of closing. So the buyer goes in and every single employee said, we're not staying on, we're leaving.
Jeez.
The morning of closing. And so obviously the seller knew this, right? But was hoping he could get over on the buyer, and the buyer just backed out there.
Yeah, so those stress stories happen, and that's why you need people on your team to know what they're doing. And we're going to wrap up with a success story. I'll go first. One of the things that I do for the dental world is I call it, Bob, treatment plan your hopes and dreams. So people can pay a very reasonable fee to ask my advice on anything in their life, right? Should I buy another practice? Should I hire an associate? And I just did one before this webinar. One of my treatment plan your hopes and dreams call was a buyer, someone who moved from New York City to Texas, changed his whole life, and he bought an old practice. I coached him through it. I said, you could do this. He bought it. He's now added like 40% to the revenue. He's revolutionized the practice. He's making twice as what he made as an associate. Tremendous success. But for him, he did it the right way. So this success story was he planned it the right way. He got the right people on his team. So that was a success story. He's out in Texas, living his best life. So glad he bought a practice. So there are good practices out there. Bob, you have a success story recent or in the past that you want to share?
Well, I can tell you one that we had a client, he bought a practice from us 10 to 12 years ago, and successful practice, probably doing about $1 million. And a couple years ago, we were just listing another practice that I knew was a half a mile away from him. And so he was the first person I contacted, and I said, hey, we have another practice for sale that you might be interested in.
Yeah.
And for somebody to buy a practice and merge it together, you have the synergies. So this buyer could make more money than anybody else could make on this practice, because when he bought this practice, and he actually merged his practice into that one and bought the building, he eliminated all the duplicate expenses. He didn't have two accounting fees, two legal fees, two electric fees. He didn't have all of these duplicate fees. So he was able to make more on that practice than anybody else could make buying that practice.
I love that.
And so I'm sure he was happy I contacted. I'm happy that we contacted him.
That, Bob, is the ROI of life. ROI, people think of money, but it's relationships, opportunity, and impact. Because he had that relationship with you, he was able to get first look at something that changed his life in the best way forever.
Yep.
I love that, Bob. So many great take-home points here for you. Definitely beware of dual rep brokers. Beware of brokers who want to go out of their lane and say they can do things, but don't shy away from creating relationships with brokers who have these connections. They're there to be on your team and help you realize your hopes and dreams. Bob, how can people reach out to you if they want to contact you directly to learn about all the brokers that you have, list of practice, talk with Laurel? What's the best way for them to do that?
You can email me at bob@udba.biz, B-I-Z, bob@udba.biz. That's probably the easiest and best way.
Awesome. You can reach out to us at dentalnachos.com or dentistjobconnect.com. And I want to thank you, Bob. I'm so grateful that we met. I love what I do. Sometimes, just like dentistry, it can be frustrating, but it can also be a lot of fun. And you get to help dentists make the biggest decisions of their lives in a positive way. And
we're definitely glad to have you, Paul. There's no question about it. Really appreciate it too.
And my jokes come for free. No one even has to pay for them, So, yeah. Awesome, Bob. Awesome, Nacho. Take us off of YouTube, and we'll stay on this.